young people, I'd love to say to them, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And the road and the journey through life is long. Be the person you were called to be. And that, in my mind, doesn't mean a young man who's lost his life, been put in the ground. That doesn't mean a young man who is being incarcerated for 25 years. There is more. Be confident. Trust the process in that if you align yourself with the right people, those hopes and aspirations that you had, and we've all had them as a youngster, as a child, they can become reality. But are you ready to sacrifice? Are you ready to invest? Are you ready to listen? And when you marry those things together, I think the future can be bright for anybody. And so I want to encourage young people, keep dreaming, but don't let it just be a dream. Align those dreams with positive actions.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Against All Odds. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host. For those of you watching this podcast for the first time, this is a podcast where we capture stories that aim to inspire, to educate, and to motivate people to succeed in whatever career they've chosen against all odds. And our guest today is someone I've recently come to know. Actually, just a couple of last week, I think it was
A week
ago, yeah. And we met initially on LinkedIn, and we spoke, and we've since connected, and we actually found that we've got some mutual friends together and all that. But our guest today is Stephen Akinsanya.
Well, that's well pronounced.
Akinsanya?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the Yorubas would say it differently, but that's good.
How the Yoruba say it?
Akinsanya.
Akinsanya.
Yeah.
Akinsanya. Okay. So Stephen is I don't know how to describe this, but he basically gets dodgy people out of trouble, right? So he gets murderers and fraudsters and okay, he's a criminal defense barrister.
Yeah.
By training, and he is obviously, judging by the name, he has some Nigerian elements. He's also just a Yoruba. So he's half Nigerian, half
Trinidadian.
Okay, that's cool. And he was called to the bar. I just found it actually. He was called to the bar in Turks and Caicos Islands.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stephen, you're welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
I mean, I've been waiting for this all week, and because you've got a really interesting background, and one of the things that we'll be talking about is something you're very passionate about. You actually also host your own podcast. I've listened into some of your episodes and all that, but Stephen is somebody who's really passionate about knife crime and putting an end to knife crime and this youth culture of knives and stabbing each other and all that. But we'll come to that later. So Stephen, tell us a bit about your background, your upbringing. You can go back as far back as you want.
Okay, so let's go back to Bristol, 1967.
Okay.
Bristol's the place where I was born.
Okay.
I didn't spend very long there. I guess you can tell because I don't have a West Country accent. But we moved to London, a place called Thornton Heath, which is
South
where
London.
I grew up, South London.
Okay. Shout out to all the South Londoners.
My late Nigerian father and my Trinidadian mother raised, there were four of us in total. I have a twin sister.
Okay.
Who's a doctor. My older brother is a barrister.
Oh, so you're a twin?
I'm a twin.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm a twin.
Okay.
And I have another older brother who worked in media for a number of years.
Okay.
And I went to school in South London, educated.
Proper South Londoner.
Proper South Londoner.
Okay.
I always wonder if I need my passport when I travel to North London. But yeah, went to school, had an interest in law from an early age through a TV program.
Okay. Which TV program was
called
that?
Crown Court, people if they're old enough to remember.
Okay.
And so around 10 or 12, after realizing being a cowboy, which is something I wanted to be when I was very young, because of watching cowboys and Indians on films. That, law was interesting to me.
Okay.
Standing up for the underdog was interesting to me.
Okay.
It's something I've always done, even from primary school. I detested bullies.
Okay.
And I was always sort of the advocate for people who didn't have a voice, even at school.
Okay.
So that sort of steered me in the direction of law.
Mm-hmm.
And I followed the sort of traditional route: university, law degree.
Where did you go to university?
Buckingham University.
Okay.
So I went to Buckingham, took advantage.
Was that your first time away from South London?
Yeah. It was a 2-year law degree, which was appealing because my twin sister, who was studying at Queen Mary, my parents were always keen for us to graduate at the same time.
Okay.
And I had a little bump in the road with my A levels. Okay. So in order for me to catch up, Buckingham was a great option. And in fact, looking back, it was a great decision because I met some amazing people.
Okay.
And then the traditional route of bar school, training to be a barrister, and then being called to the English bar in 1993. So November will be 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you're called to the bar in Turks and Caicos.
I was called to the bar in Turks and Caicos in 2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Much later. And why was that? Why did you?
Well, I just happened to be working there. Okay. I was called over to do a case, a horrible murder case that no one on the island seemed to want to do.
Okay.
And I agreed to do it. And as part of the plan, I was going to stay and live and work there. And I was called to the bar.
Okay.
But because of the split away from my family, I decided not to pursue it.
Right.
But I enjoyed it.
I bet you did.
You'll never see water like that anywhere. It's
What was it like? You wake up in the morning, you go for a swim in the ocean.
Yeah, you go for wake up in the morning, you go for a dip in the ocean, you can have a decent breakfast and still be in court for 10 o'clock.
Or in shorts or in proper
You got to wear the suit.
You got to wear the suit.
Yeah, we're not like the lawyers in Bermuda who wear shorts and then a shirt and tie. We haven't quite got there yet.
Right. Anyway, so Stephen, something I know that you're very passionate about is knife crime. Okay.
Yeah.
And recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had the Notting Hill Carnival, and there were some footage, which was, in the public domain, of some attacks and some youths, fighting against each other, running battles with machetes and stuff like that. And what really breaks my heart is that these were all predominantly black kids. Okay, black. I didn't see any white kids out there. And it breaks my heart because it gives the impression that people of color are violent. People of color are mindless and senseless, and almost insensitive to the fact that in these days of social media and cameras, and somebody's obviously going to catch it on camera.
Of course.
But these kids didn't seem to care.
No.
What's gone wrong?
I think we've had a breakdown in society and a disconnect between those who perhaps have not had the best start in life. They're not being supported. We've got more young people being excluded from school who then enter that whole new world of gangs and everything that comes with it. Young people, certain sections of young people, I should say, because it's not all young people, who want to make money fast. They're drawn in by social media. They're also manipulated by those who are involved in that kind of lifestyle. And so when you mix all those things together, this is the outcome, a complete desensitization to violence, not caring who's watching. I mean, this was happening in broad daylight, as you say. Recorded. Some people didn't even have their faces covered. And so that tells you a lot about how far we have stooped or slipped as a society when young people think it's okay.
If you're enjoying this episode, I'd like you to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification, and also like, share, and comment. Now let's get back to this episode.
And that's equally what
concerns me.
Is
this mainly sort of gang-driven, gang-related? Is it drugs related, that people trying to settle their scores. I was actually watching something yesterday. It was like a docu-series that Louis Theroux had done in the US actually, and he had interviewed some people who were involved in rap music and that whole ecosystem, right? And in that world, some of the songs that they sing and the raps that they come up with and all that are really spats between rival rappers, and then that sort of degenerates into gang war and actually shooting people and stuff. Like there's a guy who he interviewed who had survived a shooting, and there's actually somebody who the first day I listened to your podcast, there was a lady that you had on whose son was murdered.
Yes.
Some years ago in the UK, and he had grown up in a sort of a violence, environment, upbringing, whatever it is. He had tried to get out of it, and then I actually started rapping. Was he rapping? I think he was rapping.
He was.
And the reason I bring this up is that there seems to be a correlation between this culture of being black, being social media savvy, right, and trying to basically reach out to a tribe of people who, through music and rap and all that, but then it tends to come with the other things, And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, traditionally, people, when it started, would sing about their experiences in their environment, which is fine. But that environment usually has associated with it those who were involved in drugs, drugs wars, turf wars. And so that's why a lot of people think the two go hand in hand. And sadly, when people sing about their experiences, it's so often something that they've been involved in themselves. And as you said, they have disputes which have not been settled. And always pretty much somewhere in the background is drugs, because that's what people are fighting over, territory, making money, and occasionally people are fighting over relationships, i.e. over girls, women, girls.
I know, it's crazy,
And so, I just think it's so self-destructive, because with the right choices, with the right signposting, some of these youngsters can lead a completely different life. They can aspire to do so much more. And that's what I'm so passionate about, saying, look, I don't care where you come from. I'm interested in where you could get to. And with the right people in your corner and with a different mindset, you could lead a very productive life where, you're interested in having material things, which is fine. We all like material things, but it can be done in a different way where you're not at risk of losing your life or your liberty.
So would you say that is also a mindset thing? Because I've spoken to kids in Tottenham and all that, and try to understand the mindsets, right? And some of them say to me, "Look, I'm over here from the Caribbean or wherever it is. My parents are not here, or I'm in a single parent home. I'm undocumented. I don't have an immigration status. I can't work officially. I dropped out of school at 13, 14. I'm off the grid, and I've got to survive. And for them, got to survive either means doing drugs or, being a musician or a social media rap artist or whatever it is. One of the guys said to me that, look, if he finds himself locked up in prison, okay, for him, he's safer in prison.
Wow.
Okay. He's safer in prison, and then also, he doesn't have to worry about food or accommodation, because he's at Her Majesty's or His Majesty's
pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
So their mindset is that actually going down for a crime for 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is, gives them a prolongation of life, which they might not have on the streets.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, that's one category of person, and that situation is desperate. I mean, that's really desperate. And the powers that be need to get in tune with those young people who are in that situation, who are undocumented
and disenfranchised.
Yeah. But for the majority, that's not the story.
Okay.
These are indigenous youngsters born and bred here, who maybe have not had the best starts, but with the right intervention, even if they have been expelled from school, with the right intervention, with the right people working with them, there is hope. But what we've seen is that those people who are in a position to help young people, the social workers, the youth justice workers, those in after school clubs, youth clubs, all of those funding that was available for those groups has been slashed.
Okay.
And if you don't have the right people working with these youngsters, they're going to be left to their own devices. They can't be reached by people like you and I. We come from a different world. But there are those who are specialists who know how to reach these youngsters. And that's what I'm passionate about. Investing in people. If you don't invest in people, it's a reflection on society, no matter how well people are doing.
So practically, when you say there are people who can connect with these people, are you talking of people who have come out of that culture and have done something with their lives, and in so doing understand the mindsets and the challenges that people in that ecosystem have to deal with, and perhaps with their story of, look, I did this, I got help from here, blah blah blah, and I'm now doing this, I'm no longer involved in these vices, blah blah blah, and you can do this too. Is that what you mean? Is it like people who are in the community who've escaped this?
Two aspects. There are those types of individuals who've lived the life and walked the walk, who have now redeemed themselves, or been redeemed.
Okay.
And then you have those who, like nursing. Nursing's a vocation.
Yeah.
And there are those people who choose working with young people as a vocation, not for the money, but they've invested in young people being the very best version of themselves.
Okay.
Those are the kind of people that these youngsters need.
Okay. And do you think that these people would be received, by somebody who's gone into this vocationally? If you go into some places in, North London or in South London, or which are rife with gangs, and also now you even have the Somalian gangs, which are even worse than just a typical black, gangs. 'Cause, would you say that these people can go into that environment and still have some kind of impact?
Yeah, because I think it's not just about having lived that life. It's also having the skills, the patience, and building up the trust to speak to these individuals, these youngsters, who invariably their guards and their defenses will drop and they will engage. And when they encounter someone who actually is willing to spend time with them, and actually does care about what happens to them, they're more willing to engage and to listen. And equally, those people who choose it as a vocation, as well as those who've lived that life, they have that ability to listen. And when you listen, you'll hear that person, particularly if they're on their own, pour out their heart, telling them about their experiences, and be challenged about what it is that you really want to do. If you had a choice, if there was another choice presented to you, how would you feel about that? Would you make that choice? Because you recognize that this way that you're living now could only end up two ways, dead or in jail.
So let's just take a hypothetical example of a 16-year-old kid, right? Single parent household. Didn't take the education seriously. Okay. And this kid has been caught into the county lines, sort of world, and is currently selling drugs, making, $2-3 grand a week cash. Right. What options do you think people can go to such a person with that will be seen as a more valuable, a more viable alternative to the certainty of, look, I'm living in the fast lane. I don't know how long this is going to go for. I'm going to, there's somebody who, I can't remember who it was, one of these rappers, he says, I'm going to get rich or die trying.
50 Cent.
50 cents. You know? So they got that kind of 50 cent mentality. Like, look, I'm hustling, I'm making this cash, you know, I'm probably popular, I can afford the latest trainers, I can do this, I've got gold Rolex watch, you know, I've got grills and all this kind of stuff. What viable alternative can we offer such a person? And say to the person, oh, go to school, do night classes, and go and get a job in Islington Council. Come on.
But that's not, well, that wouldn't be a realistic proposition to put to them. But let me say this.
Yeah.
Two things. First of all, perception. You can be from a nuclear family, a middle class family, still get involved in county lines.
Oh, okay.
It's not only the preserve of single parent families.
Okay.
You can be from any demographic. You don't need to be black. You can be white, Asian, even Chinese. You can be from anywhere. County lines can suck you in. Now, to answer the second part, let's take 50 Cent as an example. Whatever life he was living before, I think he was shot 9 times and still survived. What's 50 Cent doing today? 50 Cent has put that lifestyle that he embraced behind him now. Now he's a Hollywood movie star, commanding big money, making movies.
Yeah.
He likes that environment. Look at Ice-T. Ice-T was one of the first rappers, part of NWA and all of that. What's Ice-T doing now? He's put that world behind him. Now a very serious actor on Special Victims Unit. Been doing it for a number of years. That's an example of guys who've grown up in that world, who said, you know what, when they've been presented with a different opportunity, they've seized it. And as I say to youngsters, listen, if you're smart enough to run a county line, because that's like running a business.
Yeah, it is actually.
If you're smart enough, and I said this the other day actually to a client I was representing, if you can do that, you're no different from the guys in the city around the Bank of England doing what they do. There's no difference between you in terms of your ability. And how would you like to be exposed to that, running your own viable business, which gives you longevity? You don't have to worry about someone stabbing or shooting you. And the point is, what you don't know with county lines, and often this is what I'm keen to educate people about. It's fine being in the fast lane, but if you're in the fast lane on that trajectory, you're going to crash. And when you crash, you're going to crash big. They don't know about the serious crime prevention orders, which restricts the number of phones you can have, that you have to give up your address where you live. You might not be able to travel. All the things that come with a conviction for county lines.
Oh, okay.
It's not worth it. So presenting them with a viable alternative to say, you've got skill, you've got this ability to understand figures, profit, loss. You could run a viable business. Use that skill.
So do you have any instances of people who you have helped, you know, defended in the course of your work, who have managed to turn their lives around and are doing something? Or do you have a higher incidence of people who you've helped kind of reoffending and you kind of always in and out of court?
Yeah, well, I mean, it falls into 2 categories. There are those who you defend, they get lucky, if you want to call it, they get off using the vernacular. Yeah. And do they learn their lesson? Some people do, and they never make that mistake again. There are a percentage who go on to reoffend, and the offending becomes more and more serious until they're incarcerated for a long time. But I've represented people who have been acquitted of the charge, and they've never looked back. They've not gone on to be businessmen in London or making lots and lots of money, but they've set themselves up with a small business, with a family, making better choices, not being driven by making lots of money, but just being happy with their freedom, their family, their friends. That's enough for them. And I've represented many of those, whether it's a small painting and decorating business or to someone who's driving a professional driver for a living. But they recognize that that is a better choice than having their doors kicked in by the police suspected of selling drugs or sitting in a prison cell for years. So yeah, I mean...
So what's... Just talk us through the process. Does somebody... I mean, how does it happen? Do you just get called by the police? Like, are you on a list of barristers that are called, or you're called by solicitors, or...
Yeah, so the way it works in professional practice as a criminal barrister, we don't do police stations. Okay. It's the solicitors who do that. So what happens is solicitors will get a call to represent someone. They will take the case on. Then once that case becomes a court case, then you need a barrister.
Okay.
And then the solicitors will instruct the barrister in the case, and it's the barrister who will be the advocate, will do all the legal arguments and present the case, make the closing speech, do any appeal. They're what we call the professional advocates in court. That's what we do.
Okay. So for instance, somebody comes to you and the person is guilty as hell, right? This person has stabbed somebody. The evidence is there. Everything's clear, you know, and you're asked to defend such a person, right? What sort of conversations would you have with a client, you know, in terms of how do you reconcile that from a professional perspective?
Well, first of all, you're a professional. So I'm often asked this question at almost every party I go to. How do you defend someone who's guilty? And I say, well, first of all, the rule of law says you're innocent till proven guilty. Well, let me finish it. Everyone's got a right to a defense. However, when I am instructed in a case and I look at the evidence, and the evidence to me is overwhelming, I will present that to the suspect, the defendant, and say, look, this is the evidence. It's overwhelming. It's stacked against you. My professional advice to you is to plead guilty for a number of reasons. First of all, you're going to be likely found guilty, but you might do well on sentence. Exactly. If they choose to ignore that advice, sometimes if I'm so adamant that I have advised them correctly and I think they're making a terrible mistake, I will get them to sign an endorsement that they've been properly advised, so that when it goes wrong, they can't blame me. Invariably, in the nearly 30 years I've been practicing, when I advise clients in that way, they'll plead guilty. They'll say, fair enough, the evidence is against me. You've shown me the evidence against me. I can't win this case. I'm guilty. There are those who say, I want to fight it, and they'll have their trial. Fine, but they'll be ready to receive the consequences when they're invariably found guilty. But no one has ever said to me, I killed someone, get me off. Or I defrauded the bank by 12 million, get me off. No one's ever said that to me. They'll maybe come with an explanation, which I think, yeah, right. But the point is, I'm an advocate first. And I will always advise my clients in their best interest, which includes pleading guilty if necessary. What skill sets do you think you've had to develop along this journey that have perhaps helped you as a barrister? You have to be analytical. By that I mean you're often presented with a set of facts and circumstances which you have to analyze quickly. You have to be decisive in the decisions that you're going to make and the advice you're going to give. You have to be knowledgeable, so you have to know what you're talking about and be up to date.
So it's like case law.
Case law, latest authority, statute, precedent. You have to be someone who's ready to listen, someone who's engaging, someone who is, how would I say, someone who is confident but not arrogant. It's a fine line, and you have to be a good speaker. You can't be a shy, retiring type and be a criminal barrister. that doesn't go well.
How does it work? When you're pitted against a prosecution in the case, and the barrister on the other side is very aggressive, and there's a lot of back and forth, and
Yeah.
I put it to you, and I do that. I mean, how do you handle all of that?
You handle it in different ways depending on the kind of character you are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily a combative, aggressive person by nature.
Okay.
So even when I'm confronted with that kind of attitude from my opponent, my skill is to find their weakness and appease them, and just kill them with kindness. And I usually get what I want.
Okay.
Because sometimes they're expecting you to be equally aggressive, and that's not my style. I'm forthright. I know what I want to achieve.
Yeah.
And often, looking back, that's the approach that I've used, and it seems to work. Some people I know, some of my colleagues, they like to fight fire with fire.
Yeah.
But that sometimes is just mutually destructive. And don't forget, the person that you're engaging with, it's not about you, it's about the person sitting behind you, your client. So you're always thinking, how can I engage with the other side which benefits my client, not me.
I also know that you host a podcast. Okay, so just tell our viewers a bit about the podcasts and what it aims to achieve.
Well, it's funny. It started during lockdown. We had an idea, my colleagues and I, before the pandemic, to have a live studio broadcast with me as the host and different guests and an audience, talking about issues that affected the community. But when the the pandemic came, we reverted to having it online. So Life in Focus, which is what the show is called, was then birthed online as an online broadcast where I would invite guests from different walks of life onto the platform. The emphasis was always going to be about youth violence, youth justice, educating the community about aspects of law, criminal law. And so the motto was, we seek to educate, inform and inspire. And it's about getting young people to realize that they could be a lot more than they perceive themselves to be. And so Life in Focus was birthed, and I think, when we started, we never had any idea that we'd still be going. And I think 68 shows later, we're still going.
I see. Who were some of the interesting guests you've had on?
I've had a BAFTA award-winning guest who was a serving police officer. I've had academics who are specialists talking about stop and search. I've had school teachers. I've had justices of the peace. I've had Lee Jasper's been on my show.
We interviewed Lee Jasper.
So I've had a number of interesting people from the different walks of life, as I say, always with an emphasis with stop and search, crime, justice, punishment, and the youth, because that's what I'm really passionate about.
What are your thoughts? I mean, Trevor Phillips was quoted this week as basically saying that people of West Indian heritage should stop clamoring for reparations for the Windrush, the whole Windrush thing, and basically kind of do something with their lives. Focus on doing something with their lives. And there's been a whole reaction to that in the news. What are your thoughts about the injustices of the English legal system by bringing in these immigrants all the way from the Caribbean, knowing that they're undocumented and not doing anything about it several generations later?
Well, I don't like any form of injustice, and I think where it's recognized that there has been an injustice in that way, then I'm one of these people. Look, if I've got something wrong, I like to say sorry. And I think politically they shouldn't play games with people's lives, people's legacy. And people didn't ask to come, they were brought here. And if the system has failed them, and you've got people being returned because the people have, it said they're not citizens, or there's a need to pay reparations, then why not? And I always say that, if this was any other race of people, would we be having this debate? And it's all very well to say, well, we should just move on. That's fine, we can move on, but there should be recognition for the injustice that's been done. Because I know, as I say, with certain other groups of people, they wouldn't be asked to move on. So why should we?
Okay, so Stephen, I've got a question for you. We've currently got a crisis at the moment where we have people coming across the channel in boats. Okay, and I mean, I know this is probably not up your street, but I just want to get your thoughts on it. And invariably, they come here and they end up claiming asylum, but a lot of these people have paid tens of thousands of dollars or pounds to people smugglers to get them across to the UK in the hope of a better future, and probably maybe one day repaying the people who probably funded their passage across and all that. Now, the government wants to repatriate or make it less of an incentive for people to come to the UK by repatriating them to Rwanda, which is like a third country, and they spend so many millions and enter into all kinds of agreements. However, invariably, there are lawyers who stop these flights leaving on technical grounds, and it's like a feeding frenzy. I mean, what actually goes on behind the scenes? And I know this is probably not for you, but I don't know. Do you know what goes on behind the scenes? Why do people from the profession probably step in to prevent what people might think is a disincentive to what is actually currently going on by people being smuggled across?
Well, you're right. I'm not an expert, but what we have to remember, we as a country, as a nation, hold ourselves up as being one of the best legal systems in the world, and that comes with a responsibility. And the point is that if there are legal challenges to be made as a point of a rule of law, then of course lawyers will take their point. It might not be popular, but we have laws, and so if you're going to suggest that you can remove illegal immigrants, or call them whatever you want to call them, even aliens, which is a term I don't like, these are human beings. If you're going to take that stance, then do it properly, in accordance with the law. And if the law's not on your side, well, we have a mechanism to change the law. But you can't just expect lawyers just to sit back who know that the law is being broken and not assist these people, whatever the merits of them being here. That's the law.
Yeah, but you and I know that these people, well, majority of these people have come here for economic reasons, not necessarily for their safety per se. But then you have instances of lawyers. There was actually a case recently in the news where they secretly recorded some lawyers saying, "Oh no, when they ask you this, say this, and when they ask this, say that." People are actually coached on what to say to improve their chances of not being repatriated. I mean, how ethical is that?
Well, it's unethical. And I can't speak for lawyers like that. I mean, if you can't behave unethically to assist people, and those if people have been found to do that, then they should be dealt with by the professional bodies.
Yeah, I actually think they're dealt with. Actually,
so I'm no advocate for those who are bending the rules, but we have to ask ourselves the wider question: if people are coming here illegally, then we have to have a Home Office that works efficiently to weed out those who shouldn't be here and to make sure that the due process of the law is followed. And if they shouldn't be here, then they're sent back to wherever they've come from. But it's complex, because do you send them to France? Do you send them to Italy? Or do you send them to the very first place where they left from? It's not an easy thing, but what I do know is that if we're going to check and challenge people's right to be here, then we need to have a system that works. Okay. And it doesn't work
at the moment.
No.
Stephen, do you consider yourself Nigerian or Trinidadian?
Oh, that's a good question. I say I'm an eclectic mix of both, in the sense that I don't know how it works I think in the culture you side with where your father's from more.
Okay.
And so I guess I got more affiliation with being described as of Nigerian heritage, but my mother's background, the Trinidadian roots, is very much part of my makeup and who I am. And I have the beauty of being comfortable, not only being a UK citizen born and bred, but when I'm in Nigeria, I feel at home amongst people who look like me. And when I go to Trinidad, I feel at home with people who look like me. And that's the beauty of being a real Afro-Caribbean mixed heritage. I can claim both. And still be British.
Why not? Anyway, as we bring this conversation to a close, what advice would you give to a young person watching us who's probably feeling disenfranchised and can't see any hope outside of a life of crime and fast living and whatever, that perhaps might inspire them to consider other options?
I would hope that young people, I'd love to say to them, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And the road and the journey through life is long. Even with the challenges and hurdles, I regularly tell them, be the person you were called to be. And that, in my mind, doesn't mean a young man who's lost his life being put in the ground. That doesn't mean a young man who is being incarcerated for 25 years. There is more. Be confident. Trust the process, in that if you align yourself with the right people, those hopes and aspirations that you had, and we've all had them as a youngster, as a child, they can become reality. But are you ready to sacrifice? Are you ready to invest? Are you ready to listen? And when you marry those things together, I think the future can be bright for anybody. And so I want to encourage young people, keep dreaming, but don't let it just be a dream. Align those dreams with positive actions, and you have just as much opportunity to fulfill them as anybody else. But you have to believe that.
That's very encouraging. We also have a tradition on this podcast where we invite our guests to dedicate this episode to anyone of their choice or any group of people. So who would you like to dedicate this podcast to?
Wow. There's so many, but I think,
Well, you can choose more than one.
Okay, well, I'm going to choose more than one. I'm going to dedicate this podcast, first of all, to my parents, because without them, there is no me.
Yeah.
I want to dedicate this to a person who's no longer with us. A man called Chris Deve. He was a barrister who invested in a number of us when we were training. Every Friday they would meet with us and other lawyers who were practicing and teach us young ones coming through. And so I recognize him because we stand on the shoulder of giants who've gone before us. And finally, I want to dedicate this to young people. Believe. Be the person you were called to be. That's my motto, because I believe that there's music in the world for those who want to listen. So I dedicate it to the young people. Be who you were supposed to be. Don't fulfill the stereotype.
Wow. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel.
If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd like you to leave some comments in the comment section below. I'd also like you to subscribe, share, and basically help us to build a platform worthy of the guests that we bring across to you. And our aim, like I said before, is just to inspire, to teach, and to motivate you to be your better self. And Stephen, like so once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to all our guests and our viewers, this is Against All Odds podcast, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.